From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court-ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the show. Today I want to hit on a few different prongs, and this is going to be one part check-in, one part addressing morale, this very slippery, amorphous, challenging a topic and item to address and try to improve, something as broad as morale. It's something that has been front of mind for me for many years, and certainly a recurring theme here on the show or in the content. But I also want to do some Q&A because I want to kind of pay homage to where the podcast started, which was largely focused on recruiting and largely focused on trying to provide free, tangible, actionable, constructive information for those coming into the job and those just starting out in the job. And so we're going to hit on those few things. But first off, I'm recording this on July 3rd, and this is in follow-up to yesterday being the anniversary of the death of my friend Diego Moreno. I've referenced him so many times. Many people have who have been on the show who are local to my area. But there's a few reasons why I want to talk on him and about him. And the first is because, as I mentioned, morale is tricky. On a good day, we don't really have to think about it. We feel very convicted in what we're doing, in our purpose. We may feel invigorated and positive, recognizing gratitude and that we have this ability to do this amazing work. We have this ability to work with amazing people, but it's not that simple all the time. All it takes is a few things being out of whack. Maybe we didn't sleep well. Maybe we had some conflict at work, at home, and maybe things just aren't going so great at work. Maybe there's competing personalities, or maybe an outcome, a result wasn't what we anticipated because of arenas outside of our control. But with regards to Diego, every year I find myself very reflective about him, about our time together, about the things I learned from him in life and in death. And as I've said many times, he's given me a lot of inspiration and motivation to do a lot of this outward focused work that I do through Blue Grit and at work. I was not into community engagement type of stuff, public interfacing. However, for those that are newer to the show, I came to find the value of it because my buddy drugged me into it. He would make me and my canine Kato come to community events and interact with kids and interact with folks because he believed in it and he knew the value and saw the value of it, and he was able to mentor me, to teach me that. And so I make an attempt to mentor and teach other people about that too. And if you're in policing and you're feeling yourself eye roll the idea of public interaction, that type of role, it's usually a sign that you need it more than ever. And what does it hurt? How scary is it really going to be to interact with people outside of an enforcement capacity? And I would argue that it's very, very necessary. I'm not the only voice to say it, but it is a quick little nod there. So I do reflect on Diego just about every year I write, something a little bit more journalistic. I post about him and his impact on social media. I certainly think a lot about legacy in the job, because in the job we're exposed to life and death so frequently, sadly, but I don't want it to hinder or paralyze me, certainly, and I don't want it to hinder and paralyze anyone. And so I think there is significant power in recognizing the value of legacy to do as much positivity with the time that you have. And there have been years where, thinking about Diego, whether I was at work or out of town, vacation, family, that kind of thing, where super grateful, super uplifted, super energized and impassioned and reflective in that way. However, yesterday I found myself, it felt different than a lot of years recently. It's been 7 years now, but it felt just heavier. I felt super tired for the last couple days, and when I was thinking about it and kind of talking to some of my people, close colleagues and friends, several people identified, even the day leading up to yesterday, and then yesterday, several different people brought up essentially the same phrase, which was, "Hey, the body keeps the score," and that is the title of a famous, impactful book. It's on my shelf in the first responder community specifically, but it's just that recognition that we hold on to these significant jarring incidents, trauma. I don't want to overuse trauma, but that's what it is. It's a big freaking deal. And shout out to my local chaplain Pat Ellis, but he put it really well for a lot of us when he said, when you lose someone in the line of duty that way, like you are like a homicide survivor. You lost someone like your family, your close friend, in this really tragic, significant way. It's not something that we should just kind of blink on and move on with our lives. It's not that simple. So all to say, I did feel just super taxed, super tired. But then in recognizing that, I appreciate my people for kind of nudging me in that way. And then I just felt the need to just be away from my desk. Like, I felt the need to just drive around a bit, which is not super common for someone in my role because of all the administrative tasks, but it felt necessary. There was this nonverbal autistic kid that had gone missing the day prior. Fortunately, I've since saw that he was located and he's fine. He's been returned home. But at the time, I felt it was probably, a shot in the dark, just driving up and down this main thoroughfare where he had kind of left from. And it totally was a shot in the dark. I mean, we came to find out later that he had already made it a few cities over much, much earlier via the bus line. But it just felt like something that I could do. And I think that that's something that we should not ignore. It's such a significant gift to be able to do a job like this where you can go out and actually affect something. A couple weeks ago, super, super extreme, different scenario, but just driving in, I saw this dude just full sprint in jeans trying to chase down his loose dog. I have dogs. I've had dogs that have gotten loose, and it's a really crappy time, right? And the dog, of course, starts running into traffic. He's trying to stop traffic, and I felt really lucky that I was able to flip on my lights, help block the road, and kind of corner the dog, get him to run back to his owner, and then have him hop in the car with me and then take him back home so he could get his dog controlled and not hit by a car. There's a lot of people that might sound really, really cheesy and really small, and maybe it is, but to that dude, it was a big deal, and it would be absolutely a big deal to me if I was that dog owner, because I've been in that position, and it feels really, really cruddy, and you get really worried about what might happen. And even to the motorists, like, no one wants to deal with that, right? No one wants to be part of endangering a dog and an owner. So, like, super simple things. But yes, an average person can do that. But just to be able to be at work and have that be a bit of your role that you can take on, a bit of a hat you can wear, took like 5-10 minutes. But I actually felt super invigorated from being able to help, a guy, a family in that small way that day. But with Diego, once I got around some people, went out to lunch, started chatting with more people about him, about just our daily interactions. And I mean our daily interactions like the job. I don't mean specifically about him, but just like the things that needed to get done that day, some priorities, problem solving. I was kind of back in the game. And so I suppose that's my reflective way of saying that, like, hey, just ride the wave. Sometimes emotions are what they are. There's no need to fight anything. Things are going to go up and down. It's been years. But the last thing I will say for now about Diego's example was posting about him on social media, there was one of our followers that responded, "Oh, that's super sad," right? And I don't think he's been following for super long, but he's been along on the journey and kind of looking at some posts, and immediately I was like, "Hey, man, that's life." But if we get to know people like this and help us remember to live bigger, live bolder, with purpose, and to have fun, like that's the stuff. Like that's what it's all about. And so I felt pretty, again, invigorated and also happy that that was my guttural response, like my instinct when someone said, "Oh, that's sad." I'm like, yeah. However, all this other stuff, right? Parlaying it into this extreme positivity, which is really the example that we can all take from someone like Diego. And I know everyone listening has loved and lost people, family, coworkers, friends, and I think that is the best thing we can do for them is to pay it forward and pay it forward in legacy, like our efforts and our intentions and the people that we can help support. So that's going to transition us into this discussion of morale. And this is a bit more front of mind because I wrote an article. I started drafting it back in 2020. Go figure. Thinking heavily about police morale back in 2020. But I revisited it because I just started a Substack. If you're not familiar, it's kind of like a blogging platform. But just wanting to share some of the ideas and the writings I have in my newsletter or that I have in my blog on my website with a different audience that's super into that. So Substack's there, Blue Grit. If you're interested, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, just check out bluegritwellness.com. It'll take you right there to a prompt page where you can subscribe. And it has little thoughts, some information weekly about wellness, different things, and then a recap of the podcast. So if you're not up on the podcast all the time, but you want to look at the episode description and guests, and you're like, yeah, I want to listen to that one, that's an easy resource for you. But to go real quick through 5 prongs on police morale, I think it's just as pertinent as ever to revisit this. Although we are coming out of, this really tumultuous time in 2020 and following, I mean, super jarring, and it's hard to grapple with sometimes when me and some colleagues or friends are remembering what it was like dealing in that post-Floyd era with COVID and every other challenge. It felt surreal, and it feels surreal looking back at it at times. But all to say that there are things that we can continually address within ourselves, in our groups, and our teams to make sure that we're setting up ourselves the best way to build on morale, because it is a work in progress. It's something you have to water. You can't just set it and forget it. Oh, I'm just going to crush through this. Number 1, remember your why. So remembering purpose. I talked a lot about Diego, and when you lose somebody, I think it should be second nature to recognize that our days are limited and we have only so much time to do certain things. So let's put our effort and our passion and our intention behind the things we choose to do. Let's be about the things we do. And let's remember why we chose to do this job or whatever job you're doing or however you're trying to show up in your community or your neighborhood. Like, remember why. And it is good to get idealistic sometimes or revisit the idealism where you started, because that's how big change happens, right? It can definitely be appropriate to be realistic at times, but let's toggle that. Like, let's remember why we're here and no one's making us be here. Number 2 is to affect what you can. And so that goes with Stoic philosophy. You can even, if you're familiar with the Serenity Prayer, which I just heard again on a podcast, but really it's just to recognize that there's only so much you can control and do that, right? Release what you can't. Don't stress out about the things you can't control, because there is a ton that you cannot control. However, the flip is there is a lot you can. You can control your effort. You can control your intentions. You can affect and start to kind of garner your thoughts and feelings towards a thing, and then process and separate the angst of things you can't. So recognize the difference between external stuff and internal stuff and do what you can. Number 3 is to focus on who you serve. And that is recognizing that we are not the victims. The victims are calling. No one is making you be here. I loved how now retired Commander Jeff Selig, I just had him on a recent leadership panel, but he did a presentation for our leadership group years ago where he basically said, hey, like, The job is simple economics. And just like any job, the city or the agency or the government entity is paying you an amount of money for you to trade your time. So it's dollars for time. And that's the same for any job. No one owes anything, right? Like if you get paid and you put in your time, like everything's copacetic, everything's good. At the moment that the amount of money is not worth your time and you're getting resentful and you're getting frustrated, you don't feel valued, then okay, either get more money or it's time to go. And I know those are really simple terms, and a lot of people might hear that at a certain point in their career and get really frustrated because they are underpaid, undervalued. But that sentiment doesn't serve you if you're just going to stay there and dwell in it. So going back to Jeff, like he's absolutely correct. It's simple economics. If it's not worth it to you, then it's not worth it to you. And move on. Find a different agency, find a different state, find a different vocation, what have you. But ultimately, there is so much to be grateful for a lot of us, especially in this region, the West Coast. I can at least speak to that, where you are paid a living wage and you have generally really good medical benefits and all those things, right? Job stability, security, a lot of the things that people get drawn to. Also purpose, right? You're not just a cog in a wheel where you don't see what you're actually doing. You can choose to see the good that you're doing. You can choose to focus on those you're helping. Number 4, you are not your job. We talk about this a lot, and it was taught in academy back so many years ago. You cannot just be your quote unquote blue identity. And I felt this at times for sure. If I think about some of the times I was most unwell in my career, it's because I was not making time for my family or not making time for my non-cop friends. And it felt really hard at times where it felt like, man, those guys don't really understand me. And I was getting more and more into this blue culture. But it's not like they didn't want to understand me. And sometimes it was just not wanting to make the effort on my part, right? Working nights, working weekends, it's just hard, right? But a lot of things are hard. And it just means we need to be more intentional. And so, quick tip is for those that are social, especially people that might be single, unmarried, and you do have your network of friends and they are your foundation in a lot of ways, you just have to be more intentional about it. You may have to schedule something out weeks in advance or get someone to cover you at work, right? To take the overtime, cover your shift a couple weeks out so that you can take the night off and you can go hang out and catch up and do something fun with your friends, right? Unplug, socialize. Like those things are super important because ultimately this job is one that we may have numbered days and it might not be up to us, physical, mental injury, what have you. And again, the point is not to paralyze us. The point is to empower us to recognize what we can control and also prepare and think more broadly beyond just our job. And number 5, that bleeds right into take care of yourself. We're talking about morale, personal or team. Like the better we take care of ourselves, the better we'll show up with positivity, with constructive energy. It's all about putting your own oxygen mask on first. Because if you don't, you could redline, you could help a ton of people before you actually address your own stuff. But there is a breaking point, and there's so many industry experts, first responder experts, that they have made this like their full press like passion and prerogative, whether they are still in a sworn capacity and they're doing everything they can for wellness in their agency or region, or whether they're retired or next career where they're working on helping first responders in wellness training or recovery or what have you. There's so many anecdotes and many guests on the show that have shared about their red line points or getting really up close to it. So let's learn from that wisdom. Let's not require ourselves to find that breaking point. The full article is on Police Chief Magazine, but that is a subscription service. So there's a different closed version that is on my Substack now. You can find it on my website again, or you can find it on my Substack. But that is the first article I published on Substack because I feel like it's so impactful and beyond just, a police audience. Like I think those things are meaningful tenets that anyone could apply to their life to stay in this positive framework and mindset. All right, so I have a few questions that keep coming up and that I want to address, again, to pay nod to those that are coming in and coming up. I also realize that whenever I give that kind of feedback or explorative advice, it's not simply just for new people. A lot of tangible takeaways are there that can be translated or adapted for people that are well into their career. I just realized that it can hit both. And so that's where it's coming from. Generally, there are questions I get from the newer people who are about to get started or have already gotten started. So the first question I'll start with is it's a question about maintaining officer safety. And that is a huge the person was asking, like, how do you like toggle this officer safety notion? Because it's a lot to kind of grapple with when you're new, learning hypervigilance and all these tactics and approach. The first thing that comes to mind is just stay open minded, but you just got to do the thing. You got to not overthink things. If you're in that vein where you're trying to analyze like every little thing, that can paralyze you. Take note of what's being taught to you. Take note of what your trainers or your supervisors or senior officers or peers are nudging you about. But you can't try to replicate every situation based on the last one, because everything is literally totally different. An example I give is there was a recruit I knew. I think I was already a sergeant at this point, overseeing FTO, but he was having a really hard time with approach on calls, on burglary alarms, on domestics. Where first he would park like way too close, and then he'd park way too far, and then he would get in this loop where he was just kind of stuck on like how close, how far. This one I parked too close, this one I parked too far again. And I kind of drew him a diagram, and I was like, hey man, like if this is the building and this is your car, you can park like basically not here really close and not here really far. I was like, but anywhere in here is probably acceptable. And then depending on how your car is angled based on windows and doors and how you approach and like just trying to get through to a position of cover concealment, like those things are really adaptable, where like literally every single building and every single call and time of day with different lighting like might influence a different approach. So the point is, like, you can't map a perfect thing. You can just do the best you can with the inputs you have, just trying to adapt all the new information and all the new feedback that you've gotten each time. The next thing I'll say when I think about officer safety is, I've shared numerous times that if I could do it over, I would for sure have gotten into, some sort of ground fighting, control, grappling, jujitsu early in my career. However, fitness, just having a really robust cardio base and strength base, was extremely beneficial for my career, injury prevention or injury recovery, but also just being able to contend and stay in the fight and kind of win by attrition because people gas out, and I generally didn't. So, all to say, conditioning, huge for officer safety. And then your mental faculties just work so much better when you are in shape. You're not stressed. Cognitively, you just work better. And then I just want to reiterate, if you are trained and you have technique and you have body awareness and leverage awareness, like that goes so, so far. Anyone that grapples will know that. I have such a limited exposure to it, so I'm not trying to pretend. I'm just trying to say I highly value that, because a skilled person for sure will have a lot of benefit, rather than someone that's just purely brawn and trying to outmuscle someone. Like, I've seen it, I've been there, I've been the person in it with and without technique. I've also seen really huge, strong guys not using technique and really struggling to get this scrappy, probably high person into cuffs. And so, throw that all out at you to think about. Someone asked, and this is someone that I think is more trying to decide if they want to come into the job, but they asked, like, how dangerous is the job truly? And that is a fantastic question, which is why I want to approach it. The job is quite dangerous. And I know that there's some people that are, let's say like skeptical about the police or even anti police. I remember hearing a lot of these sentiments or reading them or receiving them post 2020, where people are like, "Dude, your job is not that dangerous. Like, statistically, deep sea fishermen and this and that, whatever." Cool. I'm not saying that those aren't dangerous jobs, but the potential for risk and the unknowingness, I believe, is what makes it uniquely dangerous. Like, yes, the sea is very unrelenting. I get that. Yes, falling or felling trees, forestry is very dangerous. There are protocols and training and all these things, just like police, that you can try to mitigate some things, but ultimately, like, casualties happen. But what I'm getting at is that sometimes people look at the type of city let's say a big city with high crime. They may grapple with that and say, okay, that's quite a dangerous place to work. And then if someone doesn't pass probation or get through their training at a place like that, they may go to a smaller town, much slower, fewer incidents of violent crime, and so on. And often, a lot of people in the industry will say, well, that's a better fit because it's slower paced and it's not as dangerous. However, I have issue with that because you never know. And often violence doesn't discriminate. And active shooters and violent extremists, domestic or foreign or whatnot, don't discriminate. Mental health issues don't discriminate on the type of area. You may have a different volume of them, certainly, like statistically, sure. But I do caution people that choose an agency or they wonder if they can work at an agency because it's slower. And I'll iron that out a little bit. Sometimes people can absolutely gain more traction and become very viable, proficient, safe officers working at a slower pace where it's just not call to call and they're just not going through this meat grinder of stuff. However, if people have issues with confidence, with presence, with adapting training and utilizing officer safety protocols, if they have issues with their fitness and response to stress, sometimes going somewhere smaller, quieter is not safer in the grand scheme of things. It might not be safer for them because they might have less backup. It's certainly not safer for them and certainly not safer for the public if they do not respond well to those basal requirements of what a police officer needs to or should be. So that is that. That's my really long-winded way of answering the question, like how dangerous is the job? I mean, sure, we can look at stats and all that. However, I think that what I'm really trying to get at is it depends on who the officer is and what mindset, preparation, physical ability, and cognitive ability in response to stress that officer has. I got a question about what should I expect in the police academy. I have some episodes from different current or prior academy instructors recently. Britt Kelly's one, Donovan Heavener is another one, and that's hard to answer because one, I'm not in there, but two, they really range throughout the country. There was the militant academy, which does still exist, where it's a bit more paramilitary. You're marching around, you're bracing, a little bit more rigid. And there's certainly the let's say the other end of the spectrum, which is a lot more like an academic campus setting, kind of more like a college flow of things, varying degrees of physical training and preparation. I have heard, at least in Washington State, that there was a large departure from so much physical training, defensive tactics, and just PT, just like working out. But I have heard that it's a lot more now. And so there's a lot of opinions with that. I think both are important. I think, book work's important. Scenarios are very important, but then tangible hands-on training, super important. So it's good to hear that. That's a great report back. But I think that the bigger question is advice I would give people that ask this is, talk to your local, police contacts and recruiters about that and just be ready. So rather than focus on like, what is it, just be recognizing of the huge range that it could be and adapt accordingly. Like, ask yourself and ensure for yourself that you have what it takes to be ready for the gamut, whether it's a super rigid paramilitary type of environment where you need to memorize things and yell them out on command, while maintaining your composure and your posture, literally like at attention. And then also recognize that there's an academy version where, you're going to be punished with physical activity like flutter kicks and push-ups and running miles and laps. Like, be ready for all of it. So if you take care of your fitness, if you take care of your mental game, if you study, if you're disciplined, then you will be good to go in all those things. Let me add attitude, right? Humble and hungry, which is a great way to bleed into the last question, which is just how should I approach FTO? Like, how do I make sure that I do the best I can? And those two simple words, stay hungry, stay humble, I would encourage you to focus on those things. It ensures a good open-minded attitude and it ensures a strong work ethic. And most of the time, if people know that you care, if people see you working hard and you are receptive, you check the ego, people want you there, right? People want you to work. You don't have to get it right away. But if people can see progress, I'm talking about trainers, supervisors, command, peer officers, if people can see progressive work and you got a great attitude, you got a great work ethic, Like, what else do we need? So rather than worry about too much in the weeds, if you can ensure those things, then you absolutely have a huge viable opportunity in developing your career and making it as a full-fledged officer. So thank you for listening. I appreciate you listening in. The nod to Diego, I know, a return in conversation to purpose and morale and some tangible questions. So thank you for those that do send in your questions. I'm trying to integrate more of those. Sometimes it's, a DM back, but in the podcast, I can explore it a little bit more and explain a little bit more. And your questions are solid because chances are, if you're asking it, someone else is wondering it too. So again, thank you so much for the continued support. Thank you for subscribing to the newsletter, sharing out the podcast. It really means a ton. I can't reiterate that enough. Literally, you sharing is the biggest compliment I can get. For those that go into Apple or Spotify, especially, if you're willing to give a 5-star rating and write a review if it's an Apple, that helps discoverability huge, right? So it helps this message and other lessons from experts that have come on the podcast get to more people. It's really rewarding when someone writes an email or sends a message and it's clear they're a new listener. And sometimes I'm able to ask them, like, how they found the show. And sometimes it's literally like, hey, I was looking up, police hiring stuff, or I was looking up, leadership topics in police, and I found you through Spotify or whatnot. That's super exciting, super cool. So I appreciate you all for being a part of it. It's not a me thing, it's a we thing. So with that, I will say thank you so much. Y'all take care, stay safe, and stay gritty. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.